It had been 2 months since that night at the hospital, and the world had changed quietly for both Mason and Lena. Her mother was now recovering slowly at home, and life was starting to feel normal again. At least, that's what Lena told herself. She had returned to cleaning small offices near her neighborhood, refusing to depend on anyone. But sometimes, late at night, she caught herself thinking about him, the man who once mocked her but later helped her without pride. Mason Blake, on the other hand, had become a completely different person. Blake Enterprises had transformed too. The company now ran charity programs for poor families, sponsored education for workers' children, and built shelters for the homeless. The media called it the Blake Change, but Mason never took the credit. Whenever people praised him, he only said softly, "Someone taught me that success means nothing if it doesn't help others." Yet, deep inside, he still felt something missing. Her. He would glance at the empty glass wall in his office and remember the word hope. Every time he looked at it, her voice echoed in his heart. One rainy afternoon, Mason decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He asked Mia to find Lena's address. She hesitated but nodded, understanding the look in his eyes. "You really care for her, don't you?" she asked softly. Mason smiled faintly. "More than I've ever cared for anyone." It took him 2 days to gather the courage to go. When he finally drove to her small neighborhood, the roads were wet and narrow. Children ran barefoot in puddles, laughing. Mason's luxury car looked out of place among the old houses, but he didn't care. He parked and stepped out, holding a small bouquet of lilies. Her favorite, he remembered from one of their talks. He found her outside a small apartment building, hanging clothes on a line. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair tied up, her face calm and glowing despite the humble surroundings. When she turned and saw him, she froze. "Mr. Blake?" she said in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He smiled gently. "I came to see you." She blinked, still stunned. "Why?" "Because," he said quietly, "I've been waiting too long to say something that should have been said the day you left." She looked at him uncertainly, glancing around. "This isn't your world, sir. You shouldn't be here." He stepped closer, shaking his head. "That's where you're wrong, Lena. My world means nothing without the people who make it human." Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered the wet cloth she was holding. "You've already done so much. You don't owe me anything." He looked at her deeply. "Maybe I owe you everything. Because before you, I was rich in money but poor in heart." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence. Mason took a deep breath. "You once told me that love doesn't visit everyone, that some hearts are too busy surviving. But maybe love was just waiting for someone brave enough to believe in it again." Lena's eyes glistened. "Mason, you don't have to say this. Our lives are too different." He smiled softly. "Different worlds can still share one sky." He stepped closer, holding out the flowers. "These are for you, not as a rich man's gift, but as a man's truth. I love you, Lena." Her lips parted slightly, her breath trembling. You love me?" He nodded slowly. "More than anything I've ever owned, more than everything I used to chase. You taught me that love isn't about what you have, but who you become when you find it." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "Mason, I don't know if I can live in your world." He smiled gently. "Then I'll come live in yours." She let out a soft laugh, tears running down her cheeks. "You don't even know how to hang clothes on a line." He chuckled softly. "Then you'll have to teach me." For the first time, Lena saw the man behind the title, not the CEO, not the millionaire, but a man who had learned what truly mattered. She looked at him for a long moment, her heart finally letting go of fear. Then she took the flowers from his hand and whispered, "I never wanted your money, Mason. I only wanted to know your heart was real." He smiled warmly. "It always was. I just didn't know where it was until I met you." Rain began to fall again, soft and light. Without thinking, Mason reached out and held her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood together, laughing softly as the rain soaked their clothes. Around them, children kept playing. People peeked from windows, but neither cared. For that moment, the world had faded. There was only them. Later that evening, Mason helped Lena walk her mother outside. The old woman smiled warmly. "I told you, my daughter, that good hearts find each other." Lena smiled shyly. Mason took her mother's hand and said gently, "You raised a woman stronger than anyone I've ever met." The old woman chuckled. "Then don't let her go." Mason nodded softly. "Never again." As the sun set behind the gray clouds painting the sky in gold, Mason and Lena stood side by side, watching the light spread across the wet streets. He looked at her and whispered, "Do you remember what you wrote on my glass wall that day?" She smiled. "Hope." He nodded. "You were right. Hope changes everything, even hearts made of stone." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder as he held her close, the city lights reflecting in their eyes. Two souls from different worlds had finally found a single heartbeat. One built on kindness, respect and love that grew out of laughter, pain, and forgiveness. And from that day on, everyone in the city spoke about the story of the millionaire who mocked a cleaning lady, and ended up giving her not just his salary, but his heart. The day after Lena left, Blake Enterprises felt emptier than ever before. The usual sounds of typing, phones ringing, and footsteps echoed through the wide marble halls, but for Mason Blake, everything felt silent. He sat in his office, staring blankly at the reports in front of him, but the numbers meant nothing. His mind kept replaying her voice, soft, calm, full of truth. Her laughter, her courage, the way she spoke about hope, it all haunted him now. He had spent years surrounded by people, yet none of them had ever made him feel seen. Lena did that in a few short weeks, and now she was gone. By evening, Mason couldn't sit still any longer. He called his assistant. "Mia, get me the contact for the cleaning company," he said firmly. "The one that hired Lena Hart." Mia hesitated. "Sir, may I ask why?" "Just do it," he said. His tone was gentle, but his eyes showed urgency. Within minutes, she handed him a paper with a phone number. Mason dialed immediately. "This is Mason Blake. I need to know where Lena Hart is," he said sharply. The woman on the line paused. "Sir, she left our company 2 days ago. Her mother was admitted to City General Hospital. That's all we know." Mason thanked her and hung up. He didn't waste a second. Grabbing his coat, he rushed to the elevator. "Cancel my evening meetings," he told Mia. "I have something important to do." She nodded, watching him with surprise. Outside, the city lights were already glowing as Mason's car sped through the streets toward the hospital. His heart raced, though he didn't understand why. He had never cared about anyone this much. Money could fix almost everything in his world, but this feeling, was new and terrifying. When he reached the hospital, the smell of medicine and disinfectant filled the air. Nurses walked quickly down the halls, voices echoing softly. Mason went straight to the reception desk. "I'm looking for a patient, Mrs. Hart," he said. The nurse checked the list and nodded. "Room 207, heart patient ward." He walked down the corridor, his steps slowing as he approached the room. Through the half-open door, he saw Lena sitting by the bedside holding her mother's hand. Her face looked tired, her eyes red from crying, but there was still that same calmness about her. Mason stood quietly for a moment, just watching. He had never seen her like this, fragile yet strong. Then he knocked softly on the door. Lena turned, startled. "Sir," she said, standing up quickly. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside slowly. "I heard about your mother. I came to see if you're all right." She looked down, wiping her eyes quickly. "You shouldn't have troubled yourself. This isn't your world." Mason shook his head. "Maybe that's the problem, Lena. My world has always been too small." She tried to smile, but couldn't. "The hospital bills are too high," she admitted softly. "I quit because I couldn't handle both work and taking care of her." Mason took a deep breath and said, "Let me help." She shook her head immediately. "No, sir. I told you before. I don't take help I haven't earned." He looked at her for a moment, then quietly placed an envelope on the small table beside the bed. "Then don't take it as help," he said gently. "Take it as respect." She stared at the envelope, confused. "What is this?" "It's the full payment for your mother's treatment," he said. "Already taken care of." Her eyes widened. "You didn't." "I did," he said simply. "And you don't owe me anything. You already gave me more than money could ever buy." Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head. "Why would you do that for me?" Mason's voice softened. "Because your words changed me, Lena. You showed me what real wealth means. You showed me kindness when all I ever showed others was pride." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her lips trembled as tears rolled down her cheeks. "You shouldn't have done this, sir." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not. But for once, I wanted to do something right. From the heart, not from the head." Lena looked at him silently, her heart torn between gratitude and emotion. "You don't understand, sir," she whispered. "You're a man who can buy anything, but not everything can be bought." Mason nodded. "I know. That's why I didn't come to buy anything. I came to give back what you gave me. Humanity." Her mother stirred slightly on the bed, opening her eyes. Lena turned to her quickly, wiping her tears. The old woman smiled faintly when she saw Mason. "You must be Mr. Blake," she said weakly. "My daughter talks about you." Mason smiled softly. "She talks too kindly about me, I'm afraid." "Then she sees something good in you," the old woman whispered. Lena looked at her mother, then back at Mason. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Mason smiled gently. "No, Lena, thank you. You reminded me what life really is." As he left the room, Lena watched him go, her heart full and heavy at the same time. She wanted to stop him, to say more, but her voice didn't come out. Outside, Mason stood under the hospital lights, the night breeze brushing against his face. For years he had believed power and money could fill every emptiness. But now he knew better. Love, even the quiet kind, was what gave life meaning. That night, when Mason returned to his penthouse, he sat by the window again. The city below glittered like gold, but he finally understood. Gold doesn't always shine. He took out his phone, opened his notes, and typed one sentence. "The richest man is the one who learns to give without expecting anything back." Then, he smiled faintly, thinking of her words. Hope, truth, kindness. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a love that had quietly grown out of pain, honesty, and fate. The following weeks brought a quiet change to Blake Enterprises. A change no one could explain. Mason Blake, once known as the coldest CEO in the city, was suddenly different. The man who used to walk past employees without a glance now greeted them with a nod. The one who fired workers for small mistakes now asked if they needed help. People whispered in the hallways, confused and curious. "What happened to the boss?" someone asked. "He even smiled today." Another whispered back. The truth was simple. Lena Hart. Her words had taken root inside him like sunlight through a crack. Mason had started seeing the world differently. The office didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a place full of people with stories. People just trying to survive, like her. One morning, he stood by his window, watching the city while sipping his coffee. For the first time in years, the bitter taste didn't bother him. His assistant, Mia, entered with files but stopped mid-step. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "you've been approving new policies for staff. More holidays, health programs, scholarships. Are you sure about these changes?" Mason looked at her calmly. "Yes, it's time we do something useful with our success." Mia blinked, stunned. This was not the Mason Blake she knew. But she smiled and nodded. As she turned to leave, Mason said, "Also, make sure the cleaning staff gets new uniforms and better pay." Downstairs, Lena didn't know that her words were changing an entire company. She was busy polishing glass, humming softly as always. When the manager came and told her about the new staff benefits, she smiled, not realizing who was behind it. Maybe, she thought, kindness really spreads quietly. That evening, Mason was walking out of the building when he saw Lena near the elevator, helping another cleaner lift a heavy bucket. He stepped closer and said, "Need help?" She turned quickly, surprised. "Sir, you shouldn't." "I insist. he said with a faint smile, lifting the bucket easily. She laughed softly. "You really are changing, sir." "Am I?" he asked. "Maybe you're just finally being yourself," she replied. Her words made him stop for a moment. Being himself, he had no idea who that was anymore. But when he looked at her, he felt closer to finding out. Over the next few days, Mason found excuses to talk to Lena. About work, life, and sometimes about nothing at all. He even started having lunch in the same cafeteria where the employees ate. It shocked everyone, especially when he sat at the same table as Lena. "This food is good," he said casually one afternoon. She smiled. "You mean simple food can taste good?" He chuckled. "Maybe I'm learning that too." The office gossip grew louder, but Mason didn't care. He hadn't felt this alive in years. Each conversation with Lena opened something new inside him. Warmth, laughter, peace. He realized how lonely his life had been, surrounded by walls of gold but empty of love. One day, as they walked together to the parking lot, Mason asked, "Lena, do you ever wish for more?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "More money?" "No, more peace? Always. And love?" he asked softly. She smiled sadly. "Love doesn't visit everyone, sir. Some hearts are too busy surviving to wait for it." Her words stayed with him. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He walked around his big, silent apartment, the lights of the city glowing outside. He thought about how everything he had, the cars, the house, the fame, felt empty compared to 5 minutes of talking to her. For the first time, Mason realized he didn't want to be admired. He wanted to be understood. And somehow she already did. The next morning, Mason arrived at the office early again. He walked into the main hall where Lena was mopping the floor. "Morning," he said gently. She looked up, surprised. "Good morning, sir." He handed her a small envelope. "It's for your mother," he said. "A little help for her medicine." She immediately shook her head. "No, sir, I can't take this." "It's not charity," he said softly. "It's gratitude." She hesitated, looking at the envelope. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. "You've already done enough by listening," she whispered. Mason smiled faintly. "Then let me do this quietly, as a friend." The word friend hung in the air between them. It sounded strange, but right. Later that day, Mia entered his office with a concerned look. "Sir, the board members are asking if everything is all right. You've been different lately." Mason looked at her with a calm smile. "Tell them I finally remembered that money is supposed to serve people, not the other way around." Mia nodded slowly, unable to hide her surprise. That evening, Mason walked through the office as the sun set behind the city towers. He saw employees laughing, working without fear, and for the first time, he felt proud, not of his wealth, but of what he was becoming. When he passed the glass wall where Lena once wrote the word hope, he stopped and stared at it. In the fading sunlight, the reflection of that word seemed to glow faintly. He smiled to himself and whispered, "You were right, Lena. Gold doesn't always shine." But the next morning, when he looked for her, Lena wasn't there. Her tools were neatly placed in the corner, and her name tag was gone. The manager told him she had left suddenly. Her mother had fallen very sick, and she had quit to care for her full time. For the rest of the day, Mason felt a heaviness he couldn't explain. He sat in his office, staring out the window, the world blurring around him. He didn't realize it until then. The woman who had changed his heart was now gone, and her absence felt louder than the busiest day. That night, Mason stood alone by his window again, the city lights flickering below. He whispered her name softly. Lena. And for the first time, the man who had everything felt what it was like to lose something that truly mattered. The next morning, Mason arrived at his office earlier than usual. The city was still waking up, and the air was quiet. But his thoughts weren't. The memory of Lena sitting beside him in the car, her calm face lit by passing streetlights, stayed with him all night. He had seen hundreds of people chase him for deals, praise him for success. But no one had ever spoken to him the way she did, without fear, without flattery. As the day went on, he found himself distracted again. During meetings, his mind drifted to her words, her mother, her simple smile. Finally, unable to focus, he told his assistant to cancel his afternoon schedule. Then he did something even he couldn't explain. He drove to the same small neighborhood where he had dropped her the night before. The streets were narrow, and children played outside broken fences. He stopped near her house and waited. After a few minutes, he saw Lena step out, holding a basket of clean laundry. She looked surprised to see his car but walked closer, a polite smile on her face. "Sir, did something happen?" Mason stepped out and said quietly, "I wanted to check if your mother is doing better." Her eyes softened. "She's a little better today, thank you. The hospital gave her new medicine." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad." There was a short pause. Then he asked, "Can I give you a ride to work?" She shook her head gently. "No, sir. I'm used to walking." "I insist," he said. She looked at him, hesitated, and then smiled. "All right, but only if you promise not to treat me like your employee on the way." Mason gave a faint smile, something rare for him. "Deal." They both got in the car. For a while, neither spoke. The city passed by quietly outside. Then Mason asked, "You said yesterday you studied languages. Which ones?" She smiled, her eyes brightening. "English, Spanish, and Latin. My father loved books. He taught me words from old poems and songs." Mason looked at her. "He must have been a kind man." She nodded slowly. "He was. He used to say that words can heal pain if spoken with truth. That's why I loved learning them. But after he died, everything changed." Her voice softened and she looked out the window. "We lost our home. My mother fell sick. I tried to finish college while working part-time, but it became too hard. I dropped out and took cleaning jobs. At first I was ashamed, but then I realized work is never shameful when it's honest." Mason listened silently. He had never heard anyone speak like that before. In his world, people wore masks. Everyone wanted to look strong, rich, successful. But Lena was different. She spoke with a quiet truth that went deeper than his business speeches ever could. He asked softly, "Do you ever regret not finishing college?" She shook her head. "Sometimes. But I believe life gives you lessons in other ways, too. My father used to say, 'A person's worth isn't in what they lose, but in what they refuse to give up.' So I never gave up learning." Mason felt something strange inside him. Admiration. He had met people from elite universities, but none of them had wisdom like hers. "You're remarkable," he said before he could stop himself. Lena blushed slightly. "I'm just someone trying to live with hope." That word again. Hope. It followed her everywhere, like a shadow made of light. Mason smiled faintly. "You really like that word, don't you?" She looked at him and nodded. "Yes. Hope is what keeps hearts alive, even when everything else fails." As they reached the office, Mason said quietly, "Lena, if you ever want to study again, I could help. Money isn't a problem." She turned to him quickly, surprised. "Thank you, sir, but I can't take that. I don't want help that I haven't earned." Mason was silent. He respected her answer, even though it made him wish he could do more. During the next few days, Mason found excuses to visit the cleaning area. Sometimes he asked about maintenance, sometimes about files. But everyone knew he was looking for her. The employees whispered, wondering what was happening to their boss. He, the man who never cared for anyone, now smiled when he saw the cleaning lady. One evening, as the office was closing, Mason found Lena still working. The others had left. She was cleaning near the big glass window again, humming softly. He walked over and said, "You like songs, don't you?" She looked up, a little embarrassed. "Yes, sir. My father used to sing old ones. I hum them when I miss him." Mason leaned against the window. "What kind of songs?" "Ones that talk about love, loss, and faith," she said. He nodded slowly. "I don't remember my parents much," he said quietly. "They died when I was a teenager. I grew up fast, learned to fight for everything. Maybe that's why I stopped believing in things like hope and love." Lena looked at him gently. "Then maybe it's time you start again." Her words hung in the air, warm and heavy. Mason didn't reply, but something inside him shifted. He looked out the window at the city lights blinking far away, and for the first time, he felt like the walls he had built around himself were starting to crack. As he turned to leave, Lena called softly, "Sir." He looked back. "Yes?" She smiled kindly. "Thank you for listening. Most people don't listen anymore." Mason gave her a faint smile. "Maybe I never knew how, until now." That night, when Mason returned home, he stood by his window again. The city was still loud, but inside there was silence, a peaceful kind. He thought about her voice, her smile, her courage, and though he didn't say it out loud, he knew it. His heart had started to change, slowly, quietly, without warning. 3 days passed, but Mason Blake couldn't stop thinking about Lena Hart. Every morning, he found himself glancing toward the lobby, hoping to see her cleaning near his office again. It annoyed him that someone so simple had disturbed his perfect routine. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. There was something about her calm eyes, her fearless honesty, that kept replaying in his mind like a melody he couldn't silence. That Friday evening, after a long meeting, Mason decided to leave the office earlier than usual. He rarely did that. As his car stopped at the red light near the city park, something caught his eye. On the other side of the road, under the soft orange glow of a streetlight, he saw a familiar figure. It was Lena. She wasn't in her uniform now, just simple jeans, a faded blue sweater, and a small grocery bag in her hand. But even in the crowd, he recognized her instantly. Mason leaned forward slightly, watching as she stopped to help an old woman struggling with a heavy basket. She smiled kindly, held the woman's hand, and helped her cross the street. The scene was so natural, so gentle. It didn't fit in Mason's cold world of suits and money. When the light turned green, his driver asked, "Sir, shall I drive?" Mason hesitated for a second, then said, "Stop near the park." He stepped out of the car, something he hadn't done without purpose in years. The evening air was cool, and the sound of traffic faded behind him. Lena was now sitting on a park bench, feeding a few stray cats from a small food packet. Mason walked closer, quietly, not wanting to startle her. When she finally noticed him, her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "Sir," she said, standing up quickly. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you'd be here." He raised a hand slightly. "Relax, I was just passing by." She nodded, unsure of what to say. "Do you always help strangers and feed cats after work?" he asked, his tone calm, almost curious. She smiled. "Only when I can, sir. They need kindness, too." Mason looked at the cats nibbling happily at her feet. "You think kindness changes anything?" She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the streetlight. "Maybe not the whole world," she said softly, "but it changes one heart at a time." Her words struck him again, gentle but powerful. He looked away, his gaze on the dark sky. "You talk like you've seen a lot," he said. She gave a small laugh. "I've seen enough to know that life doesn't stay kind if you stop being kind to it." They stood in silence for a few seconds, the sound of wind brushing through the trees. Mason cleared his throat. "Do you live nearby?" She nodded. "Just a few streets away. My mother isn't well, so I go home early when I can." Something in her voice changed when she mentioned her mother. Softer. Heavier. Mason noticed it. "Is she very sick?" Lena nodded again. "She has a heart problem. The medicines are expensive, but we manage somehow." Mason felt a strange ache in his chest. He wasn't used to feeling sympathy. He had trained himself to avoid it. "You shouldn't have to struggle like that," he said quietly. She gave him a faint smile. "Everyone struggles, sir. The difference is whether we keep hope alive or not." That word again. Hope. It followed him everywhere now. He looked at her, trying to read her expression. There was no sadness, no complaint, just calm acceptance. He admired that. "You're different," he said without thinking. She tilted her head. "Different?" "Yes," he replied. "People usually want something from me. Money, power, fame, but you don't." She smiled softly. "That's because what I need, money can't buy." Mason looked at her silently. The wind blew a few strands of her hair across her face, and she tucked them behind her ear. For a moment he forgot where he was, the cold CEO standing quietly beside a cleaning lady feeding cats in a park. He had never felt peace like this before. When her phone rang, she looked at it quickly and frowned. "It's the hospital," she whispered, stepping aside to answer. Mason watched her face change as she listened. Worry, fear, and then forced calmness. When she hung up, she turned to him and said softly, "I have to go. My mother isn't feeling well." Without thinking, Mason said, "Let me drive you." She shook her head immediately. "No, sir, I can manage." "Lena," he said firmly, using her name for the first time, "it's not safe to take the bus at this hour. I'll take you." His voice left no room for argument. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded quietly. As they drove through the narrow streets, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Mason glanced at her from time to time, noticing how she held her small bag close, her eyes looking out the window, lost in thought. He wanted to ask more about her life, her dreams, but he didn't know how. For once, words didn't come easily to him. When they reached a small, old neighborhood, Lena pointed to a house at the corner. The walls were cracked and the lights inside were dim. "This is home," she said softly. Mason looked at the place, then at her. "You live here?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. It's not much, but it's ours." She got out, turned to him, and said, "Thank you for the ride." He nodded. "Take care of your mother." As she walked toward the door, Mason stayed in the car for a few seconds, watching her disappear inside. He felt something stir deep in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pity, it was connection. When the car started moving again, Mason looked out the window at the dark streets passing by. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like the richest man in the city. He felt small and human. The next morning came quietly, but Mason Blake's mind wasn't quiet at all. He had barely slept. The words of the cleaning lady kept echoing in his head. Gold doesn't always shine. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. He had heard hundreds of people talk to him, flatter him, even challenge him, but no one's words had ever stayed in his head like that. He sat in his office, sipping his black coffee, staring at the city skyline. The office was as clean and perfect as always, but somehow it felt colder today. He tried to focus on the reports his assistant had brought, but the letters on the paper looked like they were dancing. He looked up at the glass wall again, the same place where she had written that small word. Hope. The cleaners had wiped the glass last night, but he could still imagine her writing it. It annoyed him that something so small could take up so much of his attention. Suddenly, his office door opened. His assistant, Mia, stepped in nervously. "Sir, the new contracts are ready for signing." Mason nodded, but before she left, he asked in a low voice, "That cleaning lady from yesterday. What's her name?" Mia looked surprised. "You mean the new one from the maintenance company?" "Her name is Lena, sir." "Lena Hart." Mason repeated the name quietly. "Lena." It sounded simple yet graceful. "How long has she been working here?" Mia replied, "Just 2 weeks, sir." He nodded again, pretending it was nothing important. "All right, that's all." But after Mia left, he opened his laptop and searched the employee records. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, but he did. There she was, Lena Hart, 25, temporary cleaner. Her file had nothing more than a few lines. No photo, no background details, just her name and position. Mason leaned back in his chair, frowning. Why did he care? She was just a cleaning lady. But his mind didn't agree. Something about her calmness, her courage, her words. They didn't fit into the world he knew. Later that day, he went down to the lobby where she usually worked. He didn't tell anyone. He just walked there casually, pretending to check the place. The moment he stepped into the hall, he saw her again. The same soft humming, the same gentle movements. She was cleaning the floor near the big glass window, sunlight falling on her hair. For a moment, Mason just watched quietly. It felt strange, almost peaceful. When she noticed him standing there, she stood up quickly. "Good afternoon, sir," she said politely. Mason nodded. "You're still writing words on walls?" he asked dryly, trying to sound like his usual self. She smiled slightly. "No, sir. I only write them in my heart now." Her simple answer made him blink. "You talk too much," he said, but there was no anger in his tone. "Maybe," she replied softly, "but sometimes silence doesn't clean the dirt people carry inside." He didn't know how to reply. For a man who was used to winning every argument, he suddenly had no words. Instead, he asked, "Where did you learn all those languages?" She looked surprised. "I studied them in college," she said slowly. "I wanted to become a translator, but life changed plans." Mason tilted his head. "Why?" She gave a small, sad smile. "My father died. We had no money left. I had to work to take care of my mother." Her voice didn't sound bitter, just honest. Mason stared at her quietly. He was used to hearing people complain or make excuses, but there was no self-pity in her tone, just strength. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then she asked softly, "Did I offend you yesterday, sir?" "I didn't mean to." Mason looked at her, almost startled. "Offend me?" He gave a short laugh. "No one dares to offend me." She looked down. "I'm sorry if my words sounded harsh." He shook his head. "Forget it." But as she bent down to pick up her cleaning tools, he said something that surprised even himself. "You were right." She stopped and looked up, confused. "About what?" Mason sighed and looked away. "Gold doesn't always shine." She smiled faintly, her eyes warm. "Then maybe you're already learning something new, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "That sometimes," she said softly, "even a cold heart can find light if it stops running from it." Her words hit him again. It was like she could see through the walls he had built around himself. After she left, Mason stood there for a long time, lost in thought. That night, he sat alone in his penthouse again. The silence was heavy. He looked around at the luxurious room, the leather furniture, the glass walls, the gold accents. Everything perfect, everything expensive. But none of it made him feel alive. He thought about Lena again, about how her uniform was simple, her hands rough from work, yet she looked more peaceful than anyone he knew. The next morning, he asked his assistant to arrange something unusual, a small language book delivery to his office. Mia looked confused but didn't question it. Mason spent the day flipping through that book between meetings, trying to understand the Latin phrases he had ignored before. Every sentence reminded him of her. Later in the week, he went down again to the cleaning area. This time, Lena wasn't there. He asked another worker, who said she had taken the afternoon off to visit her sick mother. Mason didn't know why, but his heart sank a little. He returned to his office restless. For the first time in his life, the man who believed emotions were weakness was starting to feel something he couldn't control. That evening, when the sun went down and the city lights started glowing outside his window, Mason stood silently, staring at the word she had once written. Hope. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "Maybe that's what I've been missing." The sound of heels echoed through the bright glass office of Blake Enterprises as the morning sun spilled across the marble floors. Everyone in the building knew what that sound meant. The boss had arrived. Mason Blake, the youngest millionaire CEO in the city, was known for his cold eyes, sharp voice, and endless perfection. Every employee straightened their back the moment they saw him. He never smiled, never joked, and never forgave mistakes. People said his heart was made of gold, but not the warm kind. The cold kind that only cared for money. That morning, Mason walked into the lobby, checking his watch, his face expressionless as always. But as he turned the corner toward his private office, something made him stop. He heard a soft humming sound. A woman's voice, low, calm, almost like a whisper from another world. He followed the sound and found a young woman wiping the glass wall outside his office. She wore a simple gray uniform, her hair tied back neatly, her face hidden behind a mask. Her movements were gentle, almost graceful, as if cleaning wasn't work but an art. Mason frowned. He didn't like distractions. "What are you doing here?" he asked coldly. The woman froze for a second, then turned slowly, startled but not afraid. "Good morning, sir," she said politely, her voice soft but steady. "I'm just cleaning the glass. I'll be done soon." Mason was about to walk away when his eyes caught something unusual. On the glass, written with her finger, was a word. Not in English, but in another language. It looked like something European, maybe Latin. He narrowed his eyes and said, "What's that?" She looked up, a small smile appearing behind her mask. "It means hope," she said quietly. Mason raised an eyebrow. "Hope?" he repeated, almost amused. "You can read that?" The woman nodded. "Yes, sir. It's a beautiful word." He gave a short, cold laugh. "Beautiful? You think writing foreign words on my office glass is beautiful?" She lowered her eyes. "Sorry, sir. I'll clean it right now." But something in her calm tone made him curious. He stood there watching her for a moment, then decided to test her. "If you really understand foreign words," he said, his voice filled with sarcasm, "why don't you translate the phrase on my office door? It's Latin. Let's see if your hope can handle that." The cleaning lady turned to look at the golden letters engraved on the glass door. The words were Aurum non semper lucet. Mason folded his arms, smirking. "Translate that," he said. The few employees nearby stopped typing, pretending to work, but secretly listening. The whole office went silent. Everyone knew the CEO loved embarrassing people. He had done it before. No one dared to speak to him unless it was about business. But this young woman, this simple cleaner, didn't look scared. She looked thoughtful. She stared at the words for a few seconds, then turned back to him. "It means," she began slowly, "gold doesn't always shine." Mason blinked, surprised that she actually knew it. He hadn't expected her to answer at all. But before he could say anything, she added softly, "Maybe that's why even the richest hearts can look empty." The air froze. Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. His smile faded. The employees watching tried not to look up. For the first time, someone had replied to Mason Blake. Not with fear, but with truth. He stared at her, his cold eyes searching for arrogance, for disrespect. But there was none. Only calmness. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. "I said," she repeated, her voice still soft but firm, "gold doesn't always shine. Sometimes the things that don't shine are more real." Mason's jaw tightened. He didn't like being challenged, especially by a cleaning lady, but something about her tone made it impossible for him to shout. He finally said, "You must think you're very smart." She shook her head. "No, sir. Just honest." Her answer was simple, but it left him speechless. After a long pause, he smirked again, trying to hide his discomfort behind arrogance. "Fine then," he said, his voice colder than before. "If you're so good at words, translate this, veritas in cord pauperis. If you get it right, I'll give you my monthly salary." A few people gasped quietly. The cleaning lady looked surprised but didn't back away. She took a deep breath, looked at the golden text again and said, "It means, truth lives in the heart of the poor." The entire office went silent again. Mason felt his chest tighten. Her voice was steady, her eyes clear. "Maybe," she continued softly, "that's why you don't hear truth very often, sir." Her words hit him like thunder, quiet but powerful. For a moment, Mason couldn't move. The laughter he had planned never came. He just looked at her, unable to find a single word. She bowed slightly, picked up her cleaning tools, and started to leave. Before walking away, she turned once more and said, "You don't have to give me your salary, sir. Just remember what words mean before you use them." Mason stood there speechless. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without fear, without greed, without pretending. His heart felt strange, heavy, confused. He watched her walk away down the hall, her simple gray uniform fading into the light. Everyone went back to work quietly, pretending nothing had happened, but the air was different. Mason turned to the glass wall where she had written that one small word, hope. He stared at it for a long time. He didn't know why, but he couldn't bring himself to wipe it off. That night, when the office lights went off and the city lights began to glow, Mason sat alone in his penthouse. He poured himself a drink and looked out the window, but his mind wasn't on the skyline. It was on a soft voice that had said, "Gold doesn't always shine." He repeated the words slowly to himself. For the first time, the great Mason Blake, who had everything, felt like maybe he was the one who had nothing. And somewhere deep inside, though he didn't understand it yet, a small spark had begun to glow. A spark called hope.